Hello and welcome to SRIRAM CSE. I hereby welcome you all into the fourth chapter, or I would say into the series in which we are completing the book of Indian economy by SRIRAM sir himself. And now we will be going to chapter 4. All the three chapters have been completed till now in past 8 or 9 lectures. And I have tried to make sure that I at least value add things from multiple other sources, and I have also kept in mind owing to the I would say key demands of this exam, we have updated like for example in the last chapter we discussed about development and we discussed about the Human Development Report 2025. Further, multiple other indicators of development have been discussed, and some of the indicators like wealth adjusted human development index, inequality adjusted human development index have been discussed in detail in the past lectures, and that is the beauty of these lectures. In this series, we will be moving ahead into the fourth chapter in this video. The fourth chapter, the scheme for this I would say fourth chapter would be that first we will discuss till planning, then we will start the 5-year plans in the next video from 1st till 10th. We will complete all the 10, and then in the third video we will complete 11th and 12th 5-year plan. Then in the next video we will go to post 2017 planning, that is our next chapter. Clear? With this, let's begin today's discussion. Now, economic planning and why should we plan, or why economic planning should be there, or who should plan for the state. If you remember, the NCERT starts with the 3 central problems of economies of the world. Every economy of the world has 3 central problems. Who should produce, how and for whom. Who, how and for whom. Like what should we produce, for whom should we produce, who should produce this, and for whom should we produce this. These are some of the basic questions which economics talk about. Not only this, in the subsequent lectures we read about the holistic economics, donut economics. Not only that, we discussed about behavioral economics, we discussed about life economics. Now the horizons of this subject are expanding more and more. The 3 central problems still stand, and they ask for one thing. What is the role of state? Role of state. Should state only plan, or should state help or do or take measures to actually achieve the targets which are set in the planning? That is what we followed till 1991. And in 1991, we took a further step and adopted the mixed economic model. Now, what was till 1991 and what we adopted after 1991, what does this all mean? How planning and role of state in India was decreased or increased, or how did state actually led to the development or growth of Indian economy? We will discuss that in this lecture. So, from 1951 to 2017, we will read about India's economic I would say prospect or India's economic journey. Simple. Before we go into this lecture deeper, I would like to highlight that at SRIRAM CSE we provide you best mentors, right mentors. If you have any issue with your UPSC preparation, you can scan this QR code, fill the Google form, and then connect to a right mentor at SRIRAM CSE. Further, these are the contact details. This is our Telegram channel where you can find the PPTs of this lecture also. And whatever assignments I give you, you can directly post them over there, or you can connect to me also, and I will be checking all your assignments whichever I assign you in these lectures. Clear? Now, one more thing. Let's start with planned economy. What does planned economy mean, and why do we plan in economics? Planned economy is simply, or I would like to talk about this, that it is planned or command economy. Very simple. Who has the control over the resources? Who controls the economic resources or utilization of economic resources? What kind of goods should we produce? Where should we invest? Where should we use this capital? That is all set in the planning of economy. First, If it is state-led growth, that is, the state or government will assign and dictate all the things in plans. State takes the responsibility of economic growth. It manages the key sectors and there is central planning. At the central level, there is one body which sets all the plans, and for us it was Planning Commission, which was I would say replaced by Niti Aayog in 2015. Thereby, the priorities are set with, by the government, with private sector playing a residual role, that is, all the other parts where there is not too much role to play, those sectors are given to private sector, and private sector can furnish, or I would say prosper in those sectors. For example, I would say if the state, or if this economy is led by state, or if the state is controlling all the resources, or state is having majority stake in this I would say economy, or state is developing the economy at all, it is all the responsibility lies on state. State has all the things planned in its 5-year plans, 1 year or 2 year plans. What will happen is, for example, this pen or production of this pen, which might be happening in a small scale industry or a medium scale or a micro scale industry, that will be left for private sector. But if there is a large scale, I would say production chain of these mobile phones, maybe that will be controlled by state, because that might be providing employment to or high scale employment or employment to a larger population. That is where state differentiates the economic modules in the planned economy, or state having the larger role in economics to play. That is where comes in place a debate between command economy and market-led economy. Now, what is command economy and what is market-led economy? Command economy is simple, where state defines or has a larger role, which I was talking about till now. But what is market economy? Remember that when we started this video, or when we started this series, in the first chapter only, in the first slide only, we discussed about 3 things in economy, that is production, and this was discussed in the introduction video, which is of 17 minutes, the first video. Producers, consumers, both are rational players in the market. They will work based on their interest, that is profit and utility. They will work on these 2 motives. The more profit a producer gets, he will produce more. The more utility a consumer gets, he will consume more. Simple, very simple. Or I would say, the more consumption of one single good a consumer does, his utility to consume that good, or his utility or the satisfaction by consumption of that good decreases, hence thereby decreasing the demand. Understood? One more thing which you need to remember. Now, this production and consumption in the market was assumed back then by the classical thinkers, whether that was Adam Smith or whether that was Simon Kuznets. All of them, they assumed that these producers and consumers should be left alone and they will work on their own, and there should be least role of the state. State should not intervene into them. State should let them free, and that is free market economics. That there should be no one to come and control them. That was the capitalistic idea of market economics. Clear? However, this state-led economy, or where there is command economy, or where there is planned economy, this is a thought of socialist economy. Clear? Understood? Now, moving ahead. Why India chose planning? First, it had colonial legacy. India witnessed that we were under the colonial rule, and there was a deep resentment of British exploitation. And this resentment among the freedom fighters of India towards British, this led to the thought that East India Company, which came here and established itself, was let free to do trade. Everything was free to it, and it utilized or misused all those powers, misused all the dastaks, farmans which were given to it, and established its rule. That is how capitalist economy works. Because back then in 1600s, when it got the charter, it was said that, okay, you have the monopoly to trade with East. Now, this East India Company disrupted or there was a distrust towards private trade in India or private enterprise in India. Further, there was weak private sector. Why? Because of the absence of significant domestic private sector, or I would say India was facing with poverty at large, and with that problem, that poverty at large, we had very less capital, we had very less savings, and in order to convert those savings into investment, there was very I would say menial, or rather I should say that a least number of capital or money was converted into investment because of the absence of banking system, because of the large presence of money lenders and intermediaries who used to exploit the farmers and agricultural income. That is why India got inspired by Soviet. Now, how was the Soviet inspiration there? Because there was success in USSR's planning. In 1920s, this attracted Indian leaders, and they seek rapid development of India also through the Soviet planning. Further, in order to establish social justice, for example, I should remind you that there was a thought process in the freedom fighters and in the large scale population that the caste based discrimination, women or the population in poverty, they have been facing historical injustice for long now, and India had majority of its population below poverty line. At that time, we had illiteracy, we had low development, our per capita income was very less. That is why Indian government or Indian leaders at that time thought that we should work for social justice. We should provide the benefits of economy to all. This rule of inequality should end. That is why India adopted towards planning. Now, these points are very much important to answer in mains. Clear? Because every year, or I would say rather, planning is a theme which is always repeated in UPSC. Remember? Now, how did the vision of planning start? From, or I would say earlier, before independence till independence or till 1951. How did this planning start and what was the main goal of these plans? First, it started with the Vishveshwaraya plan. I would rather remember you or try to recall all of you that we just a few minutes back had a discussion between command economy, socialist economy and free market economy. Now, once you understand that free market economy is something where state's role is limited and less role, thereby this plan comes up from a civil engineer, a designer of India's economy, or a designer of, I would say, architect of Krishnaraja Sagar Dam. An engineer who, there is an irony with engineers, and there was a person who actually developed the ammoniac machine. Do you remember his name? William B. Phillips, if you remember it, or rather I should say I have discussed it lately in the second or third chapter, third video. We discussed about the ammoniac, we discussed about that how in the post World War II, this concept of circular flow of income or concept of macroeconomics came into picture, and how actually it was depicted literally through that machine, that how this economy works. And that too was by an engineer who taught himself, not from a school, and then later on he joins London School of Economics, and then he gives multiple theories of the macroeconomics. Similarly, M. Vishveshwaraya, a civil engineer who published India's first 10-year plan in 1934. Now this plan talks about, the goal of this plan was to double India's national income within 10 years. Second, it advocated government leadership and official planning body for the planning at central level. One more thing, that was it emphasized on comprehensive statistics collection. It focused on poverty eradication through growth. So thereby, the main objective of this plan was to understand and establish economic growth of India and at least ensure that we have an income, or I would say national income, doubled in just 10 years. That was about M. Vishveshwaraya plan of 1934. Second, post this, we established a National Planning Committee in 1938. This committee was led by Jawaharlal Nehru, who prepared plans for adequate living standards and poverty eradication in India. This was before independence itself, remember it. One more thing, they focused on heavy industrialization, or heavy industry was in focus. They said that heavy industries are essential for overall growth. For building other industries, and self-reliance is required for public ownership. For example, we should develop iron and steel industry, because that development or building iron and steel industry, that will help us in developing all the other sectors. If we start manufacturing iron and steel in India, then only car making or other factories, whether that is truss making, whether that is car making, whether that is bridges, all of this will then roll out, or I would say there will be a rollover effect of this heavy industry, that is iron and steel industry, over all the other industries, whether that is railways or any other industry. Second, land redistribution was one of the key focus, because we had majority, rather I would say we had majority of the population dependent on agriculture, and proposed that we should take away the land from major landowners and distribute among all, and there should be equity in land holdings. One more thing to remember, that was Bombay Plan. This was brought in 1944. Bombay Plan was introduced by some of the famous businessmen of 1940s like J.R.D. Tata, G.D. Birla, Sir Purushottam Das, who created a plan of economic development for India. Now, what was the plan for economic development of India? It included first minimum requirement of nutrition, literacy, sanitation, housing and basic human needs, that everyone in India should at least get all of these facilities. It induced and called for that there should be state infrastructure. State should help and bring in infrastructure or invest in infrastructure, which will first generate employment, and second, it will lead to the overall growth of economy. First, if there is roadways, then only transport industry will work, and if transport industry is there, then only the produce from far away rural areas, agriculture, that will come to the markets. Remember? So thereby, we should focus on both heavy industry, infrastructure, and there should be investment in basic industries, heavy industries like steel industry. The growth targets of this plan was, first, there should twofold increase in agricultural output. We need to increase the output of agriculture. Fivefold growth should be there in industrial sector over the next 15 years. First plan was for 10 years. Second plan was for 15 years. One more thing, social investment should be there in education, health and other sectors. Alternative visions like this was planned by businessmen. Maybe it might be, I would say, a bit tilted towards the capitalistic ideology. However, communists also came into picture. M.N. Roy, who gave the People's Plan, he published the Indian Federation of Labour in 1940. This People's Plan was published in India's or Indian Federation of Labour in 1940s, and it drew attention and asked the state to invest in employment and wages, good wages. He called for radical humanism school of thought, that everyone or our plans should be focused on humanism. They should be focused on the whole humanity. Post this in 1944, S.N. Agarwal, he came up with a plan named as Gandhian Plan. Why? Because it was inspired by Gandhian ideology of village economics. He talks about decentralization in terms of economy. He talks about agricultural development, mass employment and cottage industry. Now, all of you must answer this question. Cottage industry is mentioned in which directive principle of state policy? Answer this in comment sections. One more thing, remember that we discussed about planned economy and these were some of the attempts towards planned economy. However, we need to understand what is mixed economy, because post 1991 we will adopt mixed economy. First of all, India adopted this mixed economy, a blend of market efficiency with state regulation for fairness and sustainability. India brought in public sector, private sector, and in the complementary to both of them with the state market mix shifting towards the market in 1991. Understood? The public sector, there will be state ownership, there will be state's role or a higher role to state. However, private sector will also come in and have its place. There will be largely privatization of the industries. Only a few industries like till recently it was railways, atomic energy and some nuclear energy that was reserved for private sector, but now we are liberalizing and privatizing that also. There are 4 pillars to planning which we should understand, like first of all growth, first pillar, that generally we focus on growth. First, rapid economic expansion which should benefit all the sectors. Second, self-reliance. We should develop our economy, our reserves, whether that is reserves held by RBI, I would say public stock, or I would say this food grains, stock of food grains, or public distribution system. The resilience should be in every sector, whether that is high yielding varieties, whether that is green revolution, milk revolution, pink revolution, everything, whether it comes from food security to the industrial security to the semiconductor chips or everything, rare earth magnets, everywhere these plans should focus on self-reliance in every sector. We should not be dependent, or the policies of another country should not hamper directly or should not cause major disruption into our economy. That is what we largely mean by self-reliance. One more thing, social justice. Plans are focused on 4 things. One is growth, self-reliance, social justice and modernization. We should invest in space, biotech, nanotech, artificial intelligence, and currently the large language modules or large language models like ChatGPT, these kind of, or the language learning modules, LLMs, we should focus on those. Why so? There was a question in UPSC mains that should India invest in space when its own population is hungry? There has been multiple debate on this, and I would like all of you to answer this and at least write a 500-page write-up on this question. That should India focus on militarization of space or developments in space, or I would say colonization of space, rather than focusing on its own population which is dying of hunger, malnutrition and low birth weight. Child mortality is more. Where should India invest? Should it balance both the things or should it invest in only one sector? That was about growth. Economic growth actually lays the foundation, and state should at least do that much from where the trickle down effect will start. I would generally call this effect, like for example in a village far away, maybe in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh or any of the states of I would say Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, any of the states, in a far away village, if a state establishes a milk cooperative or a cooperative which is I would say procuring all the coconuts, procuring all the produce which is there in this. If you have read about the story of Palampur, the chapter 1 of class 9th NCERT, thereby it talks about the milk processing units, it talks about the nearby market, it talks about the bullock carts and the transport system which takes the food or freight from the village to the markets. It talks about the nearby market also. Now tell me, if the state government at least sets up or I would say starts a manufacturing unit or a packaging unit in this village, and all the produce, whether that is papayas, coconuts or lychees or say makhana or say almonds or say walnuts from that village, it packs it all and then sells it to the markets like Delhi or Mumbai or Pune. Now imagine that how much investment will be there, how much employment will it generate, how much income will it generate for the farmers of that village. Now that is how state should provide for the basis of economic growth, and that will help into the trickle down effect. Because by increasing the income, maybe their education will increase, their health will increase, and the impacts of it will be there on every member of that village. Why? For example, it generated an employment of 100 people. From every family, one person is employed into that unit. Now that one person taking the wages will help all the family to upgrade. That is how it happens. That is why trickle down effect needs to be understood. It is expected to flow to all the people. The benefits of development or benefits of growth, which was to person A, this will trickle down to all the population, whether that is, remember, this approach provides slow, or I would say slow given India's population size. And this approach, though this approach proved slow for India's population size, because our population was growing at much larger speed than our economic growth. However, we need to understand what is the difference between self-reliance and self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is that when we have sufficient resources and sufficient production for ourselves. Self-reliance means that we are depending on country's own resources as much as practical, then resorting to import or foreign investment. This is pragmatic and aspirational self-reliance, that we will focus mostly on our own economy. We will try to utilize as much as our domestic economy can provide. If we need more, then we will import. Pragmatic. Self-sufficiency means that we have everything at our home. Having all the resources, we do not need to ask anyone at all. No country can be self-sufficient. It is unrealistic. Like no person can live in silo. It's only monks and saints or those people who have lost the lust for this world. They go and take, I would say, shelter in far away Kailasha. However, hereby man is a social animal, political animal, by nature a person of interaction or a person who needs others. That is why man created family, man created society, man created state. Thereby, self-sufficiency is not something which we are aspiring for. We are aspiring for self-reliance. Atmanirbhar Bharat, partly similar but different due to historical context, seeks foreign investment but goods which are made in India for domestic use and exports. That is why we introduced the production-linked incentive scheme. Social justice and modernization. Social justice, the inclusive growth talks about both rural and urban growth. Gender disparity should be decreased, caste divisions should be minimized, inter-religion gaps should be decreased, inter-regional gaps should be decreased, regional gaps should be decreased. Modernization, what does that mean? We need to invest in research and development. Education is the foundation for this, and that is why we introduced the National Education Policy 2020. Remember? How should a state achieve balanced growth? We should start with regional balance. That is, like if you remember or if you ask yourself, there is a high difference between the states of who are in hilly areas or Himalayan states and then the northern belt states like UP, Bihar. Then there comes the southern states like Maharashtra, Karnataka, Odisha, and then comes Tamil Nadu, Kerala. Now remember that Maharashtra has the financial capital of India. Further, there comes northeastern states. Now remember that Gujarat, Maharashtra, Delhi, their per capita income or the state GDP of these states is totally different from what is there in northeast and hilly states like Jammu, Kashmir, Himachal or Sikkim. It is totally different. Further, social equity is not there. For example, I will tell you the people from lower castes or the people from the lower castes, or I would say people from the slum areas, or people from the religions, or those religions which are in minority. From those religions we are seeing, or people from, or I would say the women, or people from the differently abled sections. Now these are those sections, or these are those areas where the I would say the effects of development have not reached yet. Thereby we should understand, and we should have at least intergroup disparities. There should be no intergroup disparities among the communities, whether that is religious community, regional community, tribes, or any other. Economic equality should be there, and we should decrease the economic inequality. And if you remember that this year's Gini coefficient, or the report which is published, Wealth Equality Report of the World, that mentioned that India might be a fourth largest I would say economy in terms of equality also. Why? Because our Gini coefficient actually improved. However, that was criticized because our I would say the actual ratios, or the actual difference which is given by quintile ratio and decile ratios, that showed a different picture. Now remember that we need to understand that in terms of equality, we will read about equality. This quintile and decile ratios, we will discuss it, and Gini coefficient we will also discuss that. Lorentz curve, we will discuss that. But before that, we need to understand that there is high inequality in India. I guess around 2 to 5% of the population is holding around 70% of the wealth of the nation. That is where economic equality should be established. And for this, for establishing economic equality, these plans have a greater role to play. Funding the 5-year plans, or we will just understand that how 5-year plans worked. Plans were funded through combination of resources, ensuring that there is comprehensive resource mobilization. Like government budgets, union and state governments will allocate funds for the plans. Sector-wise investment will be done in the public sector and private sector. Both the investments will be taken care of. Foreign flows, we will at least mention or understand that how we can attract more and more FDI. Soft loans can be generated from countries or international organizations. Like, for example, Mumbai-Ahmedabad bullet train was financed by a soft loan from Japan. Recently we mentioned this. Now in the next lecture we will start with the 5-year plans, starting with the first 5-year plan, target, growth, what was achieved and what was missed. We will discuss the mains aspect of these plans and prelims aspect of these plans. Both will be discussed. We are already done with the first video in which we discussed about why planning, what are different types of plans, and how do we actually do the planning at I would say national level. What was the significance of going through planning or then turning towards our planned economy to mixed economy, how that journey came into place. Now in this video we will be discussing about the 5-year plans of India, that how India started with the first 5-year plan, second, third, fourth, fifth till 12th. We will discuss all of them, and from the next chapter we will be discussing we will have the next chapter, that is chapter 5, that is about Niti Aayog, and we will discuss Niti Aayog and then its developments, that how we I would say progressed from planning commission towards Niti Aayog, how Niti Aayog developed its 3-year vision, 7-year vision and the 20-year long vision. At the end we will conclude this chapter, the chapter 4 and chapter 5, with India's vision of 2047 and 2070. That we already discussed, that India has goals to build itself as a developed nation by 2047 and be a climate friendly nation or with net zero targets by 2070. For those we need to discuss the plans of India, and that will be at the end of the next chapter, that is chapter 5. Post that we will start chapter 6. That is the entire journey. In today's video we will be discussing about every 5-year plan. You hereby are requested that you should at least do one thing, that is, keep your notebook and pen with you, make notes, running notes, and these notes I will be telling you the points which you must note down in your notes. Those points are very much important for your prelims and mains both, because in prelims only, multiple times UPSC has asked this question about the targets and the growth rate which was achieved by different plans. When was the plan holiday? There was a question which could have been indirectly linked to the 5-year plans. There was a question that this question came in 2019, I believe so, that arrange these events in chronological order, whether that was nationalization of banks, whether that was the land reforms or the constitutional amendments which happened in the past. The governments by Jawaharlal Nehru, the government or the reforms taken under Indira Gandhi, or the reforms taken under our different prime ministers. This year also we had a question about vice presidents or the presidents of India. So thereby we should understand that these 5-year plans are the economic history of India, and these 5-year plans must be thoroughly done by every UPSC aspirant, because this is highly important for UPSC mains. Clear with this? So let's begin this video, and before we go into the lecture, before we go into the content of this lecture, I would highlight that if you are facing any issues, or if you want to connect to us, if you really want that you should have direct contact with SRIRAM IAS Hyderabad, so you can scan this QR code. This is our Telegram channel in which we post the PDFs of these lectures, in which we post daily based current affairs or I would say MCQs for upcoming prelims attempt. All of that is being posted on this Telegram channel. Further, if you want to have one-on-one conversation or mentorship session, you just need to scan this QR code, and on this QR code what you will get is a direct link to a Google form. Once you fill that form, you will get connected to one of the good mentors at SRIRAM IAS. Clear with this? If you have any other confusion, you can email me on this email ID. Clear? Now, moving further to 5-year plans, we will start with the first 5-year plan. The first 5-year plan came in 1951 to 1956. The rationale for having 5-year plans is already discussed with all of you in the past video. In this lecture, we will be discussing with the key facts of these plans. So thereby, the first 5-year plan was from 51 to 56, and after every plan, there will be next plan. But in between, there was a plan holiday, there were rolling plans. There were multiple crises happened at the national level, whether that was war with China, Pakistan, or any other thing, which hampered this process of planning. We will be going through all of this one by one. So keep the facts in your notes, or you will later on download this PPT also, and then keep this PPT with you, because it is highly concise and you won't find, I would say, lesser than this notes in the market. So this is very much concise. It has our book also, and it has the snips from the MHA's document which was released by Ministry of Home Affairs, the document about the 5-year plans, and that document encompasses everything which is highly relevant for UPSC. Last time also I traced 1 or 2 questions from this document. That is why I usually use this document for 5-year plans. There were multiple questions which I can trace from this document. That is why I have pasted the snips of this across the PPT, and you will see that there is integration of this document into our book by me. So thereby, starting with this first 5-year plan, our prime target was agriculture. Why? Because India had a stressed agriculture due to large scale food grain imports and inflationary pressures. So there were 2 things. That is, first, we had to import a large food grain and then distribute it into our population, because we had to maintain a healthy population, and our birth rate was high, our death rate was high. Why? Because we had nutritional deficiencies. That is why we had to sustain our population. In order to sustain that population, we had to feed them, and in order to feed them, we had to import a lot, because our agricultural productivity was less. Remember, there was a question in 2024 about agricultural productivity, 2023, agricultural productivity of India and China, in which it was said that agricultural productivity of India is more than China, which was a false statement. Why? Because if you had just a vision that India's agricultural productivity was very less, since 1951, and it is still less as compared to China. Clear? So thereby our agriculture productivity was less. We had to import large scale food grains. We had to ensure that our prices remain less inflationary because it was imported inflation. What is imported inflation? We will read it later on. The actual growth which this plan achieved was 3.61%. However, our target was 2.1% of growth. Remember that we had minimal growth targets in the initial periods, and this growth rate which India was having in the initial decades was termed as Hindu growth rate. Clear? Now one more thing, the annual average growth as per the original plan and the target exceeded the actual target, the actual achieved growth was more than what was targeted. This plan was, one of the main architects of this plan was K.N. Raj of India's first 5-year plan. So remember this first 5-year plan. This first 5-year plan, it was based on Harrod-Domar model. What were the challenges which India faced at this stage was, first, influx of refugees. There were too many refugees. Second, there was severe food shortage, mounting inflation in the country. These are the three main challenges which our first 5-year plan addressed. Second, the plan focused on agriculture, price stability and transport and power sector. So 4 things: agriculture, which was the prime focus. Second was price stability. Third was electricity or power. And fourth was transport. It was a successful plan primarily because good harvest was there in agriculture. So thereby, if there happens to be La Nina or El Nino year, which is directly impacting the Indian agriculture, which is directly impacting the Indian economy, it means in that year our plan may not be that much successful, which happened in the next plans, upcoming plans. So objectives of rehabilitation of refugees were there, food self-sufficiency and control of prices. This was more or less achieved. However, the bigger problem, which was influx of refugees, still persists in India. Second 5-year plan, which came in 1956 to 1961, is also known as Nehru-Mahalanobis model. So there were 2 main architects of this plan. One was our Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, and Mahalanobis, who was the economist of that time. Now remember, this was Harrod-Domar model and this was Nehru-Mahalanobis model. So this plan also had agricultural growth targets and those were achieved. The major stress was shifted to establishing heavy industries. Remember this? We had focus on establishing heavy industries. The plan exceeded the targeted growth rate. Whatever target was there, this plan exceeded and achieved over the target. First, remember, simple aggravative Harrod-Domar growth model was again used for overall progression, projections and strategy of the plan. However, this was the broader sectors for agriculture industry was based on 2 and 4 sector model. This 2 and 4 sector model was developed by P.C. Mahalanobis, and that is why this plan is also known as Mahalanobis plan. So thereby you need to understand this clearly. In the second plan, in the second 5-year plan, we had 2 models which we used. One was the model by Mahalanobis, another was the Harrod-Domar growth model. This was used in second 5-year plan and this is clearly mentioned in the government document. Second 5-year plan also was conceived as an atmosphere of economic stability, because already we had first 5-year plan which brought in economic stability, which achieved a good growth rate. It was felt that agriculture could be accorded now lower priority because agriculture was already going good. Agriculture was already developed, I would say, progressing at a better growth rate. We already achieved the targets. That is why we now shifted towards heavy industries. Heavy industries was the main prime focus of second 5-year plan. So the plan focused on rapid industrialization, heavy and basic industries, advocated huge imports through foreign loans. So that is where we will bring in injections into our economy. Do you remember the first, I would say third or fourth lecture in which we discussed about circular model of economy? Circular flow of money income. Now in this model I told you that it was households and firms. With these two there was an interaction of government, financial institutions and foreign sector or external sector. Now this external sector brings in either injections or leakages. Leakages are what? Leakages are imports. And injections are what? Investments or exports. Now these investments are here, foreign loans. Remember that we discussed it earlier. These foreign loans will come into our economy. However, imports will bring in leakages. They will take away money from our economy to the foreign economies or to the foreign sector. However, this was balanced somehow, but it created a government debt which we still are owning. Clear? Now remember this, the industrial policy of 1956 was based on the establishment of socialistic pattern of society. Now remember this, this is very much important. 1956 industrial plan was adopted, and it was adopted only on the basis of socialistic pattern of what? Socialistic pattern of society. Clear? So till this date we had that ideology of socialism, the ideology of planned economy, the ideology of command economy, the ideology of state being the main central player in the market. That is what our socialist pattern of society means. This plan led to, or this plan came up with acute shortage of forex. Why so? Why did there happen to be an acute shortage of forex? Because we were totally dependent on, or we were having the policy to import more and more from outside, whether that was heavy industries, food grains or any other thing. When we increased our imports, it means we are diminishing or we are exhausting our forex. We are spending our forex reserves. And once we spend our forex reserves in order to buy imports, in order to increase, or this exhaustion of forex reserves leads to what? Leads to vulnerabilities increasing of the domestic economy. And once more leakages are there from the domestic economy, it means our money which otherwise should have been spent into this circle is going outside and will come back later after many years if it happens so. Thereby, this led to pruning of development targets. It means we decrease our developmental targets. We kept the development at a bit backstage. Price rise was also seen. About 30% price rise happened. There was a decline in the earlier plans. Second 5-year plan was only moderately successful. Remember this. It was only moderately successful. So whatever I am highlighting over here, you need to keep it in your running notes. Then only it will benefit you. Remember? Now, what was the main strategy of Nehru-Mahalanobis plan? The strategy was industrialization had to be rapid enough. The country will attain developing, or it will start developing basic industries. Once these basic industries will start developing, then we will build heavy industrialization, and through this we will build machines. Once machines are in place, then production will increase. Once the production will increase, we will have growth, and there will be an effect of trickle down, which we already read, that the trickle down effect will come in place. To make machines, thereby there will be further development. So first focus was on capital goods. Second, import substitution was there. Protective barriers were enabled for domestic alternatives, reducing reliance on foreign goods and capital. Public sector leadership was there because sizable public sector investment was there. That public sector or government should have larger role in the growth and development. Small scale industries were focused on that we should develop small scale industries. And there should be the small scale industries should be focused on the consumer goods. However, government should focus on capital goods like electricity, cement, steel and tools, because these are those industries if we invest in these industries, they will lead to the domino effect of developing all the other sectors. Understood? So what were the expected benefits of this model, Nehru-Mahalanobis model? It was expected that there will be an all-round investment. It will attract comprehensive investment across the sectors, across agriculture, industries, across pharma, services, every sector will get developed. Second, the township model, that is, we will build industrial townships like those built in Bhilai, those built in Bokaro, Jamshedpur or multiple other industrial sectors will be developed in these industrial townships. Like the way we are developing today SEZs. We are developing the, I would say, export-oriented zones, I would say special economic zones, industrial growth corridors. These growth corridors where I would say that they were main focus of the second 5-year plan, the Mahalanobis model. Second, agricultural growth. This 5-year plan talked about that farm growth will be there, but with machines, chemicals and fertilizers. However, the effects of this, or I would say the negative or cons of this, are seen today. That is what we witness in today's India, that are states of Western India, whether that is Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. This was the belt which initially got influenced by Green Revolution, and post 1960s we witnessed that there was huge production in terms of I would say agriculture. High yielding variety was introduced. We will discuss that also. But this turned into overuse of fertilizers, overuse of agriculture, overuse of groundwater, which turned the soil saline, which increased the chemical, I would say, presence in the crops, which increased the causes, the disease in the population, and it turned into that this western or this belt of northern India from Punjab to Bihar turned out into a belt of cancer, or a cancer belt, where from every household there is a patient of cancer. There runs a train for only cancer patients, that is a cancer special train or cancer express, like a train which is specially dedicated for these cancer specialists, cancer patients. Further, there was focus on defense strength, that we will increase our defense and national security. Exports will get boosted and self-reliance will be increased by industrial diversification. However, these were expected targets, but there was criticism of this model also. What was the criticism? First was sectoral imbalance. The heavy industries created imbalance with agriculture and consumer goods sector. First, because there was imbalance created between agriculture and consumer goods. Second, slow poverty reduction. The reliance was on trickle-down theory, which had slow and late effects. Thereby, once we started the capital-intensive growth under the second 5-year plan, this capital-intensive growth was expected that the effects of trickle-down will have sooner impact, but it took a long time to have actual ground-level impact. That is why this model was criticized. Now, moving to the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956, which was brought in April 1956 under this second 5-year plan. It defined that states' role in industrial development would be to develop heavy industries, to invest in capital goods, and to help small scale industries develop faster. That was the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956. That is what we should remember, and that is all what we should remember from second 5-year plan. Now, we will move to the third 5-year plan, which was from 1961 to 1966. This third 5-year plan brought in a balanced approach, because in the first 5-year plan we were heavily inclined towards agricultural development. In the second 5-year plan we invested into the industrialization and heavy machines, or I would say that capital goods only. But in the third plan we adopted a balanced approach. What was this balanced approach? This approach talks about a balance between industry and agriculture for self-sustaining economy. That our economy should be self-sustaining. Then we resorted to borrowings from International Monetary Fund. Now, this was to serve as a balance of economic crisis or payment crisis. Which crisis? The crisis which was brought in because it led to the shortage of forex. The second 5-year plan witnessed acute shortage of forex. Do you remember this? That is why in the third 5-year plan, first time we led to or we went to borrow money from IMF. However, third 5-year plan was coincided by, I would say, extreme events which otherwise or which do disrupt any of the economies of the world. Whether that you take Cold War, World War I, World War II or any other wars between any of the colonial powers or between any of the countries of this world. Even if you take Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Nagorno-Karabakh, you take any of the conflicts, Sudan, South Sudan, Africa, the 9 countries in the Africa who are fighting, the Venezuelan crisis, the recent most crisis of Venezuela when the Maduro was captured by the Trump administration or arrested by Trump administration for its oil exports. Now this all comes with economic disruptions. That is what happened in third 5-year plan. The external challenge was first, we had a war with China and Pakistan in 1962 and 1965. This disrupted the plan implementation. So thereby, in this year, we wouldn't, or even if we tried a lot, we may not achieve the actual targets which we had. So third 5-year plan, which had a target growth of 5.6%, achieved just 2.8% of the growth. Clear? So at its conception, it was felt that Indian economy has entered a takeoff stage. It was thought that Indian economy in the past 2-5 years or in the past decade has achieved a good growth rate and has achieved over the target, or both the plans were successful. Whether we say it was truly successful or it was moderately successful, both the plans were successful enough. Now the third stage, when it was said that India is now a self-reliant and a self-generating economy, it was thought so. However, based on the experience of the first 2 plans, agricultural production was seen as a limiting factor in India's economic development. Thereby, agriculture was given as a top priority to support the exports and industry. Clear that this we will help or we will understand or we will start developing or producing more agricultural output and we will start exporting it. We will develop our export strength in agricultural output. That is what was thought. The plan was, though, a thorough failure. Why so? In reaching the targets, why was it a failure? Due to unforeseen events. What were those events? First, the Chinese aggression in 1962, the Indo-Pakistan War in 1965, there was drought in 1965 to 66. Due to the conflicts, the approach during this later phase was shifted from development to defense and development. So thereby, we had a lot of expenditure in the name of defense. And that is why our growth targets were not achieved. We had to spend a lot of money into defense expenditure. And post third 5-year plan, we will go through plan holidays. And what are these plan holidays? Or why should we go through plan holidays? Because in order to recover from the setbacks which came due to external shocks, during the third 5-year plan, we had to settle or we had to come back or we had to, I would say, regain the strength which Indian economy had. We had to have higher targets. That is why the plan holidays came. Fourth plan could not be implemented due to multiple crises. The 3 annual plans for 1 year operated instead of this fourth 5-year plan. So in the first annual plan, during plan holiday, it was from 66 to 67, second was from 67 to 68, and third was from 68 to 69. What were the causes of these plan holidays? First was the war with China and Pakistan. Second was economic troubles and inflation, which we had because we had to borrow in the second 5-year plan. In this third 5-year plan, we had to borrow from IMF also. Floods and forex crisis, because forex were exhausted, or we had acute shortage of forex in the second 5-year plan itself. The death of our prime ministers, Prime Minister Nehru and Lal Bahadur Shastri, there was political instability at the national level. That is why we had plan holidays. So these 3 plan holidays or 3 years of annual plans led to or came up after the failure of third 5-year plan, and we just need to remember the date only, 66 to 69, because there was not major things which came up in these plan holidays. However, widespread distribution of high yielding varieties of seeds happened, and that is where our green revolution comes in place. Now once we started, because in this era or in 1960s, we witnessed in 1960s, we witnessed that India had acute food shortage also. Because of the droughts, because of famine, we had acute food shortage. And once we had this food shortage, we had to import food grains from USA, which USA said that we cannot export wheat, PL40, to India now. Once that was denied to us, this led to the thinking, and thereby our economists and agricultural experts, Mr. Swaminathan sir, they went on to implement the green revolution, the famous green revolution of 1960s. This green revolution brought in the high yielding variety seeds. These seeds were distributed and fertilizers were distributed at subsidized rates in the regions of northern India, in the I would say western UP, Punjab and Haryana. These were the states which were I would say got benefited from green revolution in the first phases of itself. Extensive use of fertilizers, exploitation of agriculture, irrigation, potential soil conservation due to annual plans, the economy absorbed the shocks generated during the third plan. It paved the path for planned growth ahead. Now, after this, in 1960, due to all of this crisis, rupee got devalued, or we had to devalue our rupee by around 60%. In June 1966, rupee was devalued by about 60% under World Bank pressures because our economy was highly unstable. In order to receive aid and loan from World Bank, we had to devalue our economy. That is why the rupee is to dollar rate is so much high. Not today, but back then it was. First of all, this led to what? This was to at least ensure some of the main aspects of Indian economy, to ensure economic stability in India. First reason was inflation and budget deficits were increasing. Inflation and budget deficits were increasing. Second, to align external values with domestic depreciation. Boost exports for forex reserves. War with Pakistan increased the deficit further. Thereby, the results by all of this, by devaluation, was that our exports increased faster, our imports decreased, and trade deficit also decreased steeply. Devaluation actually worked for Indian economy. Do you understand how does this happen? If we devalue our currency, if we depreciate, or if our currency gets depreciated, it means our exports will boost up. This is already discussed in the past lectures. If you still have confusion, you can ask in the comment section, then we will discuss it in the next lecture. With this, the fourth 5-year plan comes up in 1969 and 74, but from 4th to 11th, we will discuss this in the next video. In this video or in this lecture series, we have already covered why and what is the need of planning, who does the planning. In the second video, we discussed from 1st to 4th 5-year plan. In today's video, we will be starting with the 4th 5-year plan again. Before we start 4th 5-year plan, I just want to highlight that these are the contact details in which you can connect to SRIRAM IES Hyderabad or myself. If you have any doubts regarding any of the topics which we discuss, any of the things which we discuss, or if you have doubts regarding your own preparation for your next attempt, you can connect with me. Let's begin with the fourth 5-year plan itself. This fourth 5-year plan, the disclaimer here would be, as I said earlier also, that you must make notes. Running notes are the most pertinent part of this lecture series. If you're not making notes, you're doing a mistake. Now remember, fourth 5-year plan, it started from 1969 to 1974. Earlier to this, we saw multiple rolling plans. We saw that there was a plan holiday also. In the upcoming plans, we will also see that due to external factors, due to I would say agricultural crisis, due to economic crisis, due to BOP crisis, due to forex reserves or exhaustion of forex, we will see that Indian economy, as we are tracing the timeline or the history of Indian economy, or we are seeing that how Indian economy evolved over the period of time, we will see that how the 5-year plans are changing the course through political or socio-economic externalities to economy. Now let's understand this. Very simple. Fourth 5-year plan, the main objective was two things. First was growth and another was stability. Why stability? Because you might be remembering that 1962 was the turbulent time for Indian economy, whereby we earlier discussed that rupee got devalued in 1966. We had 60% of devaluation of the rupee. In the earlier plans also 66 to 69, we had a plan holiday for 3 years. 3 annual plans were launched. Why so? Because we had multiple crises at hand. We had Green Revolution, annual plans, we had the agricultural shock, we had shock in food, I would say supply. We had to introduce Green Revolution. Also, along with this, we had conflicts with China and Pakistan. That is why we launched this fourth 5-year plan with a new vision that we will have growth and stability both in the economy. Whether due to external sectors, we will create shock absorbers for external sectors, and for the internal sectors, we will develop reliance or self-reliance, or we will develop I would say Atmanirbharta, or which we currently call Atmanirbhar Bharat, or we will develop we will see that how India per se can be self-dependent, understood, or self-reliant. So first of all, we started with emphasis on underprivileged and weaker sections. We started with bank nationalization, already asked by UPSC. The chronology of events of bank nationalization, abolition of privy purses, and Green Revolution. This was asked back then. I guess it is a question before 2016. It is a question which was asked in prelims before 2016. I have a faded memory about this question, but I do remember that this question was asked. In chronological order, you need to arrange bank nationalization, privy purse abolition, and Green Revolution. So for you in the comment sections, do mention the dates that in which year were these reforms brought in. First was bank nationalization. What do we mean by nationalization of anything? That is when government owns or takes the ownership of any particular thing. For example, I will tell you what is nationalization. Very simple. If I have this remote with me, and this remote belongs to me because I purchased it. Now, if this remote is purchased by government, it is purchased by government and is used for, there is a hypothetical example, for a large screen on which public is watching cricket match every day, and that is installed by government, that electricity to it is provided by government, that TV or this remote has ownership of government, it means it has been nationalized, it is now a national asset. Similarly, banks, some of the banks were nationalized at this point of time because we had crisis in banking sector. Privy purse abolition, the payments which were promised to princely states and the princes of princely states were abolished. Green Revolution was introduced, in which we brought in and tried to increase agricultural productivity by introducing high yielding variety seeds. Now remember that, first you need to remember these things. Abolition of privy purses, this will be studied in detail in polity. Bank nationalization will be studied in detail in Indian economy chapter only, but when we start banking. what all the banks were nationalized, how they were nationalized. Green revolution will be studied in detail once we start the chapter of agriculture. Understood? So there is no need to panic about that. Why are we not going in detail into these? Oil shock was there because all the oil exporting countries, they decided that we will increase the prices. There is a cartel of OPEC nations, oil and petroleum exporting countries, OPEC nations or OPEC plus, you should search about it, you should read about it. They decided to increase the prices, and that is why there was oil shock, and this brought in inflation in the domestic economy. Again, there was an Indo-Pakistan conflict in this time because 1971 we had the East Pakistan crisis, that is Bangladesh. And due to this liberation of Bangladesh and India's, I would say, involvement into this, establishing democracy in Bangladesh, this led to, I would say, a problem, a pertinent problem or a persistent problem which currently is being faced. This is even faced today. The influx of migrants and the treatment to migrants, the NRC, CAA and the, I would say, the SIR in Bihar or any other things, the reforms or demographic reforms which are being brought are basically linked to this event also. One thing is that. So the fourth 5-year plan, as per the government documents, had a target of achieving a growth rate of 5.7%, but it actually achieved 3.3% growth. Now this means that we performed less than what was targeted. However, in this war, in this time period, we had Indo-Pakistan conflict, and the twin objectives were first growth with stability and progressive achievement of self-reliance. So first and second, two goals were there in the fourth 5-year plan. One more thing which you need to remember is, hereby we started to emphasize more on agriculture, growth rate of agriculture. Why? Because this will lead to what? This will lead to the growth or domino effect in other sectors also. Once agriculture gets developed, other sectors will also start developing, because agriculture, in the past videos also we discussed that there are backward linkages and forward linkages in agriculture. If they are established well enough, this agriculture can help to develop the overall economy. This we will be reading further, don't worry. So the first 2 years of this plan saw a record production increased, but the last 3 years, first 2 years, 69, 70, 71 and then 71, there was less production, poor monsoon. Implementation of family planning program was introduced in this plan. Bangladeshi refugees came into India after 1971 war. However, this plan is considered a big failure. Clear? If there is any doubt, you can ask in the comment section. Now, one more thing which we need to remember is, in the fifth 5-year plan, we had growth and social justice as the two main objectives. But hereby, Indian economy was facing with a problem of high population rate, a problem of unplanned families, or a problem of family planning, because there were too many people, too many mouths to feed. So that is why our government started to understand the problem, to develop or start measures to control the population, improvise. See, 3 things have to be done over here. First was to control birth rate, and second was to control death rate. 2 things. Third was to introduce or to understand or to help this population, whatever is remaining in this, whatever the population we have, whatever the demography we have, they must be fed with nutritious diets. There must be enough food. And the most important thing, there should be no poverty. Why so? Because if this population, whatever is remaining, if we have less population, see, understand a simple thought. A person who belongs to or a poor person or a poor farmer or a poor father, he thinks that if I have 4 sons, it means I have 4 arms to earn. I have 10 sons, I have 20 arms to get the earnings into my house. That is why more population means more earnings. More household members means more earnings, because it was all labor intensive program, I would say economy, or a labor driven economy. Further, there was one more thought, that if I had 10 sons or 10 children, not I per se, but any of the people or any of the, I would say, father living back then, if he has 10 sons or 10 daughters or 10 children, maybe 5 of it may survive, because there was high infant mortality rate, high child mortality rate, and this will lead to what? Survival, difficulty of survival. Thereby, government has to introduce programs for multiple things. First was healthcare, second was nutrition, third was survivability, and fourth was poverty. That is why you will see from this program onwards, government will introduce measures to help this population become better and better, because we are controlling the birth, we are controlling the death rates. Understood? We are decreasing the death rates, we are decreasing the birth rates. That is how we can have a stable population. Once we have a stable population, our fertility rate, or I would say total fertility rate, anyone in the comment section, please tell me what is the current total fertility rate of India. Is it 2% or I would say 2 or 2.1? Not percent, it is either 2 or 2.1. Now, I know the answer, either it is 2 or 2.1, but I want you to answer this question. One more thing which you need to remember is, the main focus is on equitable development during the turbulent political period. So, in this political period, first was that national emergency was declared on the grounds of internal disturbance in 1975 to 77. Now, these were the 2 periods, 2 years of Indian history, which are termed as the dark history or the dark period of Indian democracy, because in this time there was just a minor internal disturbance. A protest started from Bihar or the Gujarat, and it was led by students. This protest saw the emergence of some of the leaders like Jayaprakash Narayan ji, and these leaders led the student movement, and this movement shaked the government, which otherwise had a monopoly in political power. You might be remembering this thing, or you might have read this in polity, that from independence till 1960-67, we had a single party dominance. And due to that, we had only one party, and it was said by multiple people, or the people from colonial era, or I would say multiple governor generals. They said that India is Congress and Congress is India, or India is Indira and Indira is India. These were some of the cliche terms which were used for Indian politics per se. Now, we do not need to go into politics, so thereby moving ahead, in 1977, Janata Party came into power and introduced the 6th 5-year plan. However, you need to pause it over there. We are still on the 5th 5-year plan. Let's complete it, then we will go to 6th 5-year plan. The new government removed the Janata plan and launched the official 6th plan. So, it was in 1977 to 1988. Understood? There was a gap of 3 years, and after 3 years, 1980, another 6th 5-year plan will be there. 1979 to 80, there was a gap of 1 year in which there was a plan holiday and no 5-year plan was, I would say, implemented in this time period, 79 to 80. Now, be clear with this thought or this chronology. Let's revise 5th 5-year plan. Target was 4.4%. Actually, we achieved 4.8% growth. The final draft was prepared by D.P. Dhar. The Dhar Commission, you must remember about the Dhar Commission, and it was prepared only in the backdrop of economic crisis. Why was there economic crisis? Because there was hike in oil prices. As you remember, do you remember there was oil shock, there was hike in oil prices during 4th 5-year plan. Now, due to this hike, there was an economic crisis, and in order to settle this economic crisis, which was created due to runaway inflation. Now, in the types of inflation, there is a type of runaway inflation, hyperinflation, galloping inflation, creeping inflation. We will read all of them. Headline inflation, core inflation, we will read all of them in inflation chapter. So there was runaway inflation, that is, inflation was out of control. It proposed to achieve two main objectives. One was removal of poverty, that is Garibi Hatao, as we discussed over here, the removal of poverty. Second, there was Atmanirbharta, or attainment of self-reliance. As I said over here, that India has to decrease its dependence on the external the other countries. Further, we need to understand. Further, we had promotion of high rate of growth, better distribution of income, and significant growth in the domestic rate of savings. It means Indian economy started to save more. Now, what does this mean? How do we save more? By better financial inclusion. If we are saving more, now remember, why am I discussing this? Because UPSC PYQs, means one entire question was on this only. That India has a paradox, or there is a savings investment paradox, or diamond paradox we call it, saving investment diamond paradox. That is, despite the high savings, because Indian economy has this feature that in Indian economy we have high savings. Everyone tries to save. The first thing you learn from your family is, once you grow into the adolescent age, being a woman or being a child or being a girl or being a male child or a female child, whatever you are, or any other child you are, either any of the genders you have, 10, 20 genders are there, whatever gender you have, remember that, because I don't want to go into that gender debate, remember that everyone is told by their parents that start saving something. This is the common term which every household has, which every parent talks to or talks out this to his children. Now, why do you need to save? Because we are in such a country which is still in the swinging state between the underdevelopment or least development to development, or we are in the I would say emerging world. Now, in this emerging world, we have insecurities, social insecurities. In these emerging worlds, we have less social security. We do not have too much of I would say pension, healthcare, insurance provided by government. So thereby we should understand that we need to save. And this was the point where India's domestic rate of savings increased. But the problem is that, do you remember the circular flow of income which we read in the past chapters, which we read in the past videos? That circular flow of income talks about that financial institutions take the money from the circular flow, from the basic model, and this money is a leakage. And then this money is invested back into the firms, and that is injection. That is, first the leakage happens through savings and injections happen through loans. Now, this is the problem, that how are we converting the savings into investment? If that is good, if the velocity of money is good, if the I would say the velocity is higher, or if I would say that if the monetary policy transmission is better, if the money is changing hands, if there is high investment culture in the economy, then only higher savings will help. Otherwise, higher savings are a burden on the banking sector. Understood? Because even if you create loans, those loans will convert into NPAs, and that is what happened to our private sector, to our banking sector. We had a huge NPAs till 2015, and then RBI came up with reforms. We will read about that also. Due to high inflation, cost calculations for the plan proved to be completely wrong, and the original public sector outlay had to be increased. A public sector, the outlay, that is whatever the government planned to invest in the public sector, this was increased or revised upwards. After the promulgation of emergency in 1975, the emphasis was shifted to the implementation of Prime Minister's 20-point program. Now remember this, Prime Minister's 20-point program was introduced. When was it introduced? It was introduced post the implementation of emergency in 1975. Clear? One more thing. 5-year plans was, FYP was relegated to the background, and when Janata government came into power in 1978, plan was terminated. That is what happened to the 5th 5-year plan. It was terminated in 1980s. Clear? Now, that is how 5th 5-year plan from 1974 to 79 worked. Clear? Now, let's move to rolling plan concept, because earlier also we discussed that earlier in 1966 we had 3 rolling plans, or we had a plan holiday. First time rolling plan was introduced by Defense Ministry in 1962, only Defense Ministry, because at this time China attacked us. Due to this Chinese attack, it was recommended by Professor Grunal Mridal. Now, he is the one who wrote the book, The Asian Drama. Or he is the person who says that 21st century belongs to Asia, and particularly India. Clear? Now, Janata government considered it in 1971 that we should also introduce rolling plans. Main feature of rolling plan is that it is annually introduced. It is introduced for 1 year. Multi-year goals are set but not rigidly followed. However, the 1-year targets are rigidly followed, are to somehow extent followed and achieved. Targets are reset according to the changing circumstances. That is why it is said as, it is called as rolling plan. Why is it called rolling plan? Because it rolls over. It, I would say, traverses, or whenever it travels through different pathways, it actually changes its course of action or course of the movement. One more thing, what are the advantages of this 1 year or the rolling plan? First, it is flexible and particularly very much helpful in such economic situations where we have the uncertainties, like the COVID-19 plan, or the COVID-19 year was such year in which we had to think about the short-term impacts. It overcomes the rigidity of the fixed 5-year plans, because it is flexible in nature. It is for 1 year only. It can be changed after 1 year. It resets targets as per the changing conditions. Disadvantages are there. That is, there is weak commitment to achieve the targets. Usually the targets are less achieved. Potential economic instability is there from frequent revisions, because if you are changing the rolling plans again and again, it means that your economic stability will be at stake. You might be less stable economy wise. Now, moving to the next rolling plan concept. 1978 to 1980, in the 2 years we had 2 rolling plans, or we had 2 sixth plans. Do you remember? 2 sixth plans we discussed over here. 77 Janata government introduced the 6th 5-year plan, and 1980s when Janata government was removed, the new government removed this Janata plan and introduced official 6th 5-year plan. So we had 2 6th 5-year plans. Remember this point. Clear? So then Janata government put forward a plan for 1978 to 83, emphasized on the employment in contrast to Nehru model. Clear? Which the government criticized for concentration of power, widening of inequality, growing or mounting poverty. They said that due to this Nehruvian model, we had inequality, poverty or unemployment. That is why we need to focus on what? Employment rather than I would say reduction of poverty. However, the government lasted for only 2 years. That was the time period of Janata government, and then back again in 1980, the Congress government again came into power and started the vision of poverty eradication or decreasing the poverty or removing the poverty. Garibi Hatao program was again back into picture from 1980 onwards. Clear? 6th 5-year plan was introduced from 1980 to 1985, which was the official plan introduced by Congress government. That is what we are reading. The first major aim of this plan was poverty eradication. This poverty eradication through what? Through direct attack was foremost purpose. Infrastructure was strengthened for industry and agricultural development. Major programs which were launched was first, integrated rural development program, training of rural youth for self-employment, development of women and child, National Rural Employment Program, Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program, growth which was achieved was around 5.7%. It was more than the target which was set by 6th 5-year plan. The target was 5.2% and the growth was 5.7%, and that is why, or not because of this figure, but because of the overall achievements of this plan, it is termed as a success plan or a successful plan. Do you remember the first, second and now the 6th 5-year plan? It is clearly mentioned that they were one of the successful plans. Clear? Now, do you remember that just 4 or 10 or 15 minutes before we had a discussion on how government will start introducing different types of developmental plans, welfare plans, to make its demography resilient, to make its economy better, to introduce social justice. That was the goal of 5th 5-year plan. And now remember that this thing will be followed in 6th 5-year plan also. Post rolling plans, in the 6th 5-year plan we had the objectives. The objectives of development, social justice. That is why we will introduce rural development, youth self-employment, women and childhood or women and children development, employment guarantee. Understood? Clear? In this year 1981, India took a loan from IMF. Again, earlier also we, I would say, generated a loan from World Bank for developmental aid, and this time we are taking a loan from IMF in 1981. Clear yahan tak? Chalo. Next, 7th 5-year plan, 1985 to 1990. This series was promised that it will be entirely in English, and for the Hindi medium students, I will be doing this series in Hindi also, but after some point of time. Now, 7th 5-year plan, 1985 to 1999 or 1990, it stressed the rapid growth in food grains, because 7th 5-year plan in 1985 to 1990, we had again the shortage of forex reserves. We had a BOP crisis, and due to that, there was a problem. There was a problem because India had to now focus on food grain production. India had to focus on employment opportunities. India achieved a growth of 5.81%, which exceeded the target. The target was 5% and we had a growth rate of 6%. Not 6 point, achieved a growth rate of 6%. Now remember, this is the official document of the Government of India. That is why we will take numbers from this only. The facts have to be always verified from the government documents. This is the only rule in UPSC. All the facts must be verified from government documents. If not, you are doing it wrong. Clear? Now, remember, we achieved a growth, or I would say a growth rate, which was better than what was the target. In this 7th 5-year plan, we started to liberalize our economy. But remember, the reforms of LPG came officially in 1991. Liberalization, privatization and globalization. We will read about them also in the next lecture, or in this lecture only, in the next, I would say, 8th 5-year plan. Liberalization began. Plan saw the beginning of economic liberalization with consensus building for reforms. We started to think about that we should liberalize our economy. We should not totally control our economy. State should not have too much business to do business in the state. We should not control everything. We should not own everything. Rather, we should help the private sector to flourish more. Because state, when it comes to the role of state, it may provide us with basic necessities. It may provide the economy with, I would say that all of the people in India might be having social welfare, might be having good education, health, but the problem is that how growth can be achieved. Why was this mentality set in place? Because in the GDP lecture also, I discussed this, that the discussion at international level, see, I'll tell you the story. Do you remember that in the past lecture, we had a discussion about that how macroeconomics emerged. So there was a thought post World War II that do we need to grow at a stable rate of 2% or 3%, or do we need to achieve a consistently higher growth rate? That is, if last year we were growing at 2%, this year we should grow at 3%. next year 4%, फिर 5%, 8%, 10%, 12%. Now why is this needed? Or is this the sole reason for destruction of the entire planet? That is what usually I talk about at different platforms, that this mentality of economics, the Hindu growth rate was the best growth rate for sustainability. Hindu growth rate was the best growth rate for economic survival, for donut economy, for entire planet's good health. Till this time, we were not over-exploiting. We were not destroying Aravalis, we were not destroying Hyderabad jungles, we were not destroying the Chhattisgarh jungles, we were not destroying the tiger corridors, elephant corridors, we were not doing that kind of development. We were majorly focused on the social justice part of demography. But hereby, the economic growth of India was termed as Hindu growth rate. Why? Because we had a trap. We were, I would say that, trapped into something that we were not able to break the shell of 5% growth rate. Our economy was not going beyond 5% growth rate. Because till this time, if you were with me, we never had a growth rate of more than 6%. So that is why we thought that for the longer term, in order to achieve 9%, 10% growth rate, because it is currently being said that if India wants to become a developed nation by 2047, it must have at least 7.3% of growth rate with at least 30% of investment rate for the next 22 years, then it will achieve this. Understood? Because this was recently which I discussed in the wrap up of entire 2025 economy. I'll be you will find that link or you will find that video in multiple channels which usually are there, in which I work or in which I post multiple things. You seriously want to get connected, do get connected, and I do discuss multiple things across YouTube or across different social media platforms, and due to that, or I would say that from all of that, usually you will get that understanding of how to approach the national, international issues better. Done? So thereby, long-term fiscal policy in 1968 was set that first we need fiscal stability. We do not need to overly depend on loans and external aid or external loans. We need to simplify our tax system to increase the taxation or tax revenue to help Indian economy have tax buoyancy. To enhance resource allocation efficiently, to shift from the ad hoc yearly policies to the 5-year long-term policies. Not only 5-year long-term policy, but we should have a roadmap of 100 years, of 20 years, 50 years, 70 years. That is where we should think now, not only about rolling plans of 1 year or 2 year. So that is why at this point of time, for the first 3 years, there was an export-import policy which was introduced and which was announced, and it replaced the annual export-import policies. So in the external sector, we thought about this, that we should liberalize the economy for longer term. Now, that was 7th 5-year plan, in which our main focus was on food, work and productivity, 3 things. This plan was very successful as the economy recorded 6% growth rate against the targeted 5%, with the decade of 80s struggling out of the Hindu growth rate, which was 5%. So in the 6th 5-year plan, we broke out, or not 6th, but 7th 5-year plan, we broke out of the shell of Hindu growth rate from 5% to more than 5%, that is into the 6% arena. Done? Now, from 1990 to 1992, there was a crisis year, 1990 to 1992. We had crisis years and we introduced again the plan holidays. In the 8th 5-year plan, which was not able to be started in 1990s due to economic crisis, external uncertainties and political instability, we introduced 2 5-year plans. One was for 1991, 92. Clear? And in 1991, there was the first major turning point for Indian economy, in which the socialistic pattern of Indian society or Indian economy changed to liberalized, privatized and globalized economy. Understood? So from the next lecture, we will start from 1991 to current, that how our economy evolved, or how or why did we introduce all of these reforms, what are the major outcomes of these reforms, what are the results from these reforms, how much have we achieved. And the bonus for this lecture would be that at the end, I will again share with you the entire discussion which I had earlier. We will be having that discussion again, that the wrap up of entire 2025, that how Indian economy progressed in 25 year, the entire 25 year, and how it developed or how it increased or set targets for its 2026, what it needs to done, how should we understand economy in the present scenario. That will be the bonus part for all of those who are watching these lectures consistently, who are showing their love to these lectures, or who are actually giving me feedback about these lectures. Done with that? With this, let's conclude today's discussion, and tomorrow we will start with 8th 5-year plan from 92 to 97. Clear? This chapter we already have had 3 videos. In those we discussed from 1st to 8th 5-year plan, and today we will be starting with the 8th 5-year plan. 7 plans are already discussed. Before we start the 8th 5-year plan, there is simple description which you all know about. This is the QR code for Telegram channel, and this is for Google Form mentorship. If you want to arrange your mentorship, you can scan this Google Form. And there are contact details also. If you want to connect with me, if you want to talk about anything about your preparation, you can contact with me also. Now, moving ahead, it was 1990s which was the main turning point for Indian economy. Now, we all know that 1990s we had our major reforms and we adopted the mixed economic model. We already have discussed that mixed economic model means that we have integrated both the capitalistic and socialistic patterns. That is, we have market to somehow or to some extent regulated by government, and government acting as a facilitator for the market, and government providing only the essential services. There is minimal role to the state. And that is what we mean by mixed economy. Mixed economy means there is presence of government and private partners, these private enterprises, both in the market. Now, once we understand this, we should remember that what led to this economic model, or what led to adoption of the mixed economy. So, we already know that in 7th 5-year plan, we discussed this thing. In the 7th 5-year plan, we discussed this thing, that there was this Hindu growth rate, and first time we achieved that 6% mark, and in this 6% mark what we had was we broke the shell of Hindu growth rate. But why did this happen, and why did we go for some of the reforms which we led through liberalization? Why did we adopt liberalization even in the 7th 5-year plan itself? Why did this happen? Because we already were facing a shortage in terms of forex reserves. This shortage happened earlier also in 2nd 5-year plan, but there when it comes to 7th 5-year plan, the shortage was more. However, once we reached the end period of 1990s, 1980s, the end period of 1980s witnessed that in 1991 or before that in 1990 financial year, we had a problem, that is our forex resources or reserves were exhausted, and it was left for only 1 week to import oil or food or anything, whatever we were importing. We had only a forex cover for 1 week for our import bills, entire import bills. Now, that is why in the 8th 5-year plan, we will bring in the structural reforms. The structural reforms, first of all, India took a loan from IMF in order to bail itself from the BOP crisis. What do we mean by BOP crisis? That is, our forex reserves were depleted and they were less than $1 billion. Less than $1 billion. There was one more problem, that was twin deficit of budget and current account both. That means we had budget deficit also and we had current account deficit also. Both the things. It means in the domestic economy also there was crisis, and in the external sector also there was crisis, which means we were incurring deficit at two fronts. it is equivalent to a two-front war, and in economic terms this is a severe situation in which we needed a resource, or I would say that in which we needed a solution from outside, not from inside, in order to develop our economy in the long run. Now, remember that this 8th five-year plan, its target growth was 5.6%. This was the target, and what we achieved was 6.8% was the actual growth which was achieved. It means that majorly we grew by good numbers in this 8th five-year plan because of the structural reforms which Indian economy had. Major objective was to control the population growth, to reduce poverty levels and generate employment, because employment is the panacea for poverty reduction, strengthen the infrastructure and institution building. We need to strengthen infrastructure, we need to build institutions, involve Panchayati Raj institutions, Nagar Palikas in rural development and municipal bodies in the urban development. We need grassroots level democracy, grassroots level development. We need local participation, grassroots participation into the process of development. Understood? India became WTO member on January 1, 1995. Panchayati Raj institutions were given constitutional status in this era. Understood? Are we done with this? 8th five-year plan, it was not just this. The plan was already postponed by 2 years, which we remember, 78, and this, it was postponed by 2 years, 90, 91, 92, 92 to 97 was the 8th five-year plan. Why did this happen? Because there was balance of payment position, which we already discussed. Widening budget deficit was there, recession was there in industry, and inflation was rising. That is why our domestic economy was in crisis, and our external sector was also facing the same problems. The plan undertook drastic measures to contrast or combat the economic situation. Undertook an average growth rate of 5.6% by introduction of fiscal and economic reforms, including liberalization under the Prime Minister Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao. So actual growth which was achieved was 6.8%. Now remember some of the major economic outcomes which we had during 5-year plan, 8th five-year plan were: first, we had rapid economic growth, that was highest annual growth rate ever we had so far. From independence 1951, from the first 5-year plan till now, we never had a growth rate of 6.8%. This was the first thing which happened. High growth of agriculture and allied sectors. Manufacturing also grew. There was growth in exports and imports. That is why even today Indian government is focusing on increasing our exports. We are focusing on increasing exports more and more. It was achieved even though the share of public sector in total investment had declined considerably, about 34%. What does this mean? That share of government or share of public sector in total investment, it means government is now decreasing its investments. Government is now decreasing its investment. What does that mean? Government is decreasing its business to do business. Do you understand it? That government is now receding backwards. It's not going into the private sphere, it's liberalizing its economy, it's privatizing its economy, it's giving away its economy to private sector. Okay, now there will be more role played by private sector than the government sector. Understood? That is why this era is known as the main reform era in Indian economy. Now, this 5-year plan or 8th five-year plan was developed by P.V. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, who then was the economic advisor, and you should the finance minister also. Now you should understand that there was this model of economic development was also known as Rao Manmohan model, and it is also termed as liberalization, privatization and globalization model. Once you understand this, these economic reforms since 1991 are based on the then Prime Minister and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh. First of all, what did they achieve for, or what was their objective? First was to reorient state's role, that is we should limit the role of state to infrastructural and social justice or social development roles. we should dismantle the control and remove the license Raj. That is, all and every activity in India till then, whether that was by industry, agriculture or any other thing, it was mandatory to have licenses for everything. Suppose I will give you an example. If I had to produce this bottle, the glass bottle, I had minimum 20 or 30 licenses which were required to start this industry. Then if I had to sell this bottle with filled water or mineral water, I might be required by 20 or 15 more licenses. Now this was termed as license Raj because this was heavily burdened by bureaucracy, and this led to the culture of red tapeism. This led to the culture of the Babu culture in Indian bureaucracy. This led to the culture of more files, filing and piling, that everyone started to make files, everything was written, and it took a hell lot of process, a long process to even get one industry on ground working. So this was the main, I would say, lacuna in Indian industrial sector, but this thing never ended actually. This thing still exists there. However, we have reduced it to a level which is very minimal now, but not at all. We have not eliminated it at all. Still we require licenses because, for example, if I tell you that if I am selling a water or if I am selling, for example, this oxygenated water or carbonated water or simple water or mineral water, I should be at least having some of the licenses from ISI, from I would see FSI, I would be required a license from BIS standards, I would be required a license from I would say pollution control board. Now why is all of this required? In order to understand or ensure that a wrong product or a contaminated product or an impure product is not being served to public, and if it is so, then public will remain healthy and there should be nothing such led freely in the market which will hamper or destroy the public health. That is all the whole scenario of it. That is why we require licenses, but this shouldn't be too much, and if it is too much, it will disincentivize the private sector. Understood? Next, one more thing, create competition in the economy, because once there will be open economy, more players will come, they will invest, and more investments will lead to more enterprises, more firms coming in place, and if there are more firms, then there will be more competition and prices will be better. People will get good quality products. Global integration, we will integrate our economy with global economy. We will open up our economy for FDI and FII, both for import and export, both. It was a sorry, the import and export was there. FDI, FII was very much limited, but presently we have largely, I would say, majority of the sectors of Indian economy, majority of the firms, majority of the sectors, and sorry, majority of the areas, industries, firms, they have been liberalized for and globalized also. Everyone can invest in FDI for 100%, even 100% through automatic route is also allowed in majority of the sectors. Even this year also we discussed about insurance sector in budget, that insurance sector should also be allowed 100% FDI, and 74% is currently where we are standing. Now what were the results of LPG reforms? We need to remember it. What were the results of the LPG reforms? First, we had forex accumulation. Our forex reserves grew, and these forex reserves started accumulating. We started saving forex, and till now we have around $600 to $700 I guess million in $6 to $7 billion of forex reserves which we currently have. I guess this number was a bit back, 1 or 2 months back. I don't remember the right now, but yes, it is somehow around this 6 to 7. Foreign flows increased, FDI and FII also increased. Competitive economy was there, global competition, and exports started to grow. And currently, if you see, our trade and our goods exports, if you see, we have trade balance, or I would say that we have trade surplus with majority of the countries of the world. Not majority, but yes, largely some of the countries. Like for example, with USA, we have a trade surplus of, we had a trade surplus of, not currently, but we had a trade surplus of around 40 to 45 billion dollars. Now, that is how India achieved its exports, or export, I would say, export strength. But these exports were restricted in terms of goods or visibles. In terms of invisibles or services, we are having more exports because our economy is service-led economy, and that is why our service exports are more than goods exports. And in service exports also, the growth in service exports this year in 2025 exceeded the growth in trade exports. That was for the first time in many of the years past. That is how Indian economy since 1991 till now is witnessing growth only because of, not only because of the LPG reforms and the reformative era. Now, once this is done, we need to understand what is indicative planning for the next plan. So this indicative planning was adopted in 8th five-year plan only, with the economic reforms which were launched in 1991. What do we mean by indicative planning? It is a imperative, that is a shift from imperative and directive, that is hard to soft planning. What do we understand by soft planning? As we will try that state should act as a facilitator. State should just define the goals of the economy. For example, we have a goal of reaching the developed nation state by 2047. This is the largest goal, or this is the main objective of Indian economy in the long term. But how will government work for this? State should facilitate for this. State should invest in infrastructure. State should invest in logistics, transport, and multiple other sectors so that our economy grows in that direction. Understood? Government's role from controller to regulator. Further, policy climate, government created a predictable, irreversible, transparent policies or fiscal monetary investments to encourage corporate sector contributions. That is, there should more contribution come from private sector into all of the research fields, or I would say into all of the services. For example, if we talk about, yesterday I had a video on this healthcare, that how much apathy is there in the privatization of healthcare. But meanwhile, we should also understand that government sector also, or public healthcare system also, must be understood that there is, I would say, a large scale drawbacks, whether that is doctors, availability of nurses, or doctor to population ratio. This all is a toll, but due to privatization, there has been a largely significant, I would say, achievement in terms of prevention of, I would say, or curation of disease due to the super specialty hospitals who are investing in cancer research, new drugs, or due to investment by different pharmaceutical companies who are investing in developing new drugs, whether that was Covishield vaccine, whether that was any other vaccine. Now you should understand that these investments by private sector are needed for Indian economy. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible back then that India currently is free from polio, India currently is free from multiple other diseases which are otherwise present in the global world. Further, there is a strategic vision. Planning Commission works on long-term plans, and we started with Planning Commission, and post Planning Commission, we had from 2017 onwards, we now have Niti Aayog. Moving to 9th five-year plan, it started from 1997 to 2002. The plan commenced amid the political instability. In this time also, we had political instability in and East Asian financial crisis. Now, what was this East Asian financial crisis? In 1999, India's first, the ADR, Infosys, was listed on NASDAQ. Understood? So, Kargil war occurred at this time also. In 1999, Indian government launched the Swarn Jayanti Gram Swarozgar Yojana, which was launched to absorb IRDP, TRISEM and DWRCA. Remember that these programs were earlier launched for increasing the rural employment. One more thing which was launched in 2000. This was Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana for rural roads. In 2001, we launched the Golden Quadrilateral. Now, why was this launched? It is a highway network in which government is connecting 4 metros. But this happened along with the 9/11 terrorist attack and Doha round of WTO negotiations also started. Now see, on the slide you might be seeing some of the I would say terms which we have not discussed yet. First of all, this was the era in which the first thing happened, that was the Kargil war for India. Second thing which happened was the 9/11 terrorist attack in the I would say in which the Twin Towers were destroyed. Now this led to main, I would say, instability in the political arena of the globe, and everyone started to talk about terrorism. Everyone started to talk about the because this is something which we are facing currently more. It started from 9/11, it increased or it witnessed the global presence of terrorism was from 9/11, but post that till now we are witnessing this growth in these incidents. A higher number of these incidents, and there is a more discourse about terrorism at the global level. It started back then, and it coincided with the East Asian financial crisis also, in which multiple banks got bankrupt. Now remember this thing, that this was the era when Indian government had to think about the plans which we had set in 8th 5-year plan. What was that plan? State as a facilitator. How will state facilitate growth? State will start facilitating growth by providing infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure is there? Golden Quadrilateral Highway Network. Swarn Jayanti Gram Swarozgar Yojana. For what? For rural livelihood. Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. Not only national highways but also rural roads. There was privatization of public sector undertakings. Disinvestment started to begin in previous plans. Nuclear tests were conducted in 1998. This is also something in which the Smiling Buddha operation was launched, Pokhran 1, Pokhran 2. Now this was the era when Indian economy actually started, not only economy, when India started to make a position at global table or diplomatic tables around the world. This 9th 5-year plan was prepared under the United Front government, which focused on 2 things. One was growth with social justice and equality. This aimed, or the aim of it was dependent on the private sector, that is, we need to facilitate private sector more and more, and it asked or it tried to attract more the foreign direct investment, and state was envisaged to increasingly play the role of facilitator. As we discussed earlier also, that state will be playing the role of facilitator now. One more thing which you need to remember, that India started, or Indian government started to invest in education, health and infrastructure, while as private participation was likely to be limited in these sectors. However, the assigned priority to agriculture and rural development with a view to generate adequate production, employment and eradicate poverty, this was also kept in place. That is, we still were focusing on agriculture to eradicate poverty and generate employment. Now the same question, remember, now the same question, that how agriculture and rural development, remember, how agriculture and rural development can help us in generating production, employment and eradication of poverty. This was the question asked by UPSC mains. Clear? The target growth was 6.4%, however, this was not achieved and only 5.4% growth was achieved because we already discussed there was instability in the world, particularly in the Asian region. Then came the 10th 5-year plan from 2002 to 2007. Remember that this was such an era in which we witnessed a good growth. 8% was the target annual growth for GDP in this plan. Clear? 5% poverty reduction was to be achieved by 2007. 1 crore jobs or annual employment for new entrants was to be generated, and there was a target to reduce the gender gap by 50% in terms of reduction and wages, that is equal pay for equal wage, or there should be minimum difference between the wages or between the salaries of male and female. Now, once this plan started with a drought which was there, a severe drought from 2002 to 2003. Second, the GDP plunged to 4%. We started that we will have a growth rate of 8%. We will have a growth rate of 8%, but GDP plunged to 4%. But then exceeded 8% next year due to base effect. What is this base effect? Do you recall it? Do you remember it? We already discussed that what is base effect. Base effect is when we discuss that how much percent growth are we achieving. For example, if we had to achieve 4% growth, it means that we are comparing GDP of 2002, for example, with 2000 and I would say 1990. But if we change the base year, for example, if we change the base year 2002 in comparison to 2000, a year, for example, a year in which there was very less growth, because we had only 5.4% growth. If we compare these two numbers, the base effect will change, the growth numbers will change. Narega, do you remember Manrega? The Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Guarantee Act. Do you remember this? We had 100 days of work or guaranteed employment in this, but this was recently reformed to by SRIRAM bill, and now we will be providing 125 days of work for or guaranteed work employment. But there are criticism. You must read this bill. There is a very severe criticism going around this bill. You should read it. First was this. Next, National Rural Health Mission was launched, so that we have, I would say, vaccination, medicines distribution should be easily done. Economy grew by 7.8%. The target was 8%, but economy grew by 7.8%. So that was 7.6% was the actual growth. Sorry, not 7.8, but 7.6%, which is mentioned by the official document of government. Now remember one more thing. That is, that this 10th five-year plan, it recognized that economic growth can't be the only national priority, but we should have at least monitorable targets for few key indicators, and these were 11 indicators of development. What were these indicators of development? For example, the first indicator was gender gap. Gender gap in terms of literacy and wage rate. Even there was to be achieved, that we have to achieve, this was a goal or an indicator to be set, a reduction in infant and maternal mortality rates. How many people or how many infants are dying in the first year? How much maternal mortality or mortality, how many mothers are dying during pregnancy or during the labor or during the delivery. Improvements in literacy, this was to be achieved. Access to potable drinking water, cleaning of major polluted rivers. Governance was described and considered as a factor of development, and state's role was about planning, and this was to be increased, that state should plan more rather than execute. With greater involvement of Panchayati Raj institutions, state-wise breakup of targets for growth and social development sought to achieve balanced development of all the states. Now remember that till the past 2 or 3 plans, we had till 1990s, we had a limited role of states. Now hereby we will witness a beginning of competitive I would say not competitive, but yes, it is cooperative federalism. We will see a beginning of cooperative federalism. But post this, after some of the years, or I would say post 1900 and post 2015, when Niti Aayog came into place, we are now witnessing a growth of, or a beginning of, cooperative and competitive. Competitive federalism. Understood? Now, the 11th 5-year plan from 2007 to 2012. 10th is done, 11th 5-year plan from 2007 to 2012. It was towards faster and more inclusive growth, and same thing was asked by UPSC, the theme of this plan. What was the theme of this plan? What was the name of this plan? This was asked by, I don't remember exactly was it asked by UPSC or some of the state PCS, but I do remember that it was asked. First, 11th 5-year plan targeted that we should accelerate growth, we should make economic growth faster. Poverty and jobs should be generated, we should decrease poverty, generate 70 million new jobs, reduce unemployment below 5%. Key sectors, there was focus on agriculture, education, infrastructure, areas of concern to grow rapidly. See, this PPT is the shortest form of all the notes which you can find anywhere. What you need to do is, you need to make some running notes for yourself. And you will find this PPT on our Telegram channel. Our admin, the center head of Hyderabad is very well cooperative, and they are sharing all of this and they are in connection to every student. Whosoever tries to connect, they do respond wholeheartedly. So do connect to the administration, do connect. And if you need any help from my side, you'll at any point of time you can connect with me. 11th 5-year plan from 2007 to 2012. This 11th 5-year plan had a target growth of 9%, but the actual growth which was achieved was 8%. Remember the fact? The aim of 11th 5-year plan was towards faster and more inclusive growth. Clear? India had emerged as one of the fastest growing economy. Now remember this. You might have seen this fastest growing economy across multiple newspapers. In different newspapers, or every news channel is talking about India is fastest growing economy, and it achieved this in back then 2012. By the end of 10th 5-year plan, the savings and investment rates, do you remember that I already discussed this thing with you, that India's saving and investment, saving is not converting to investment? That was the problem, and that was the question asked by UPSC. These saving rates had increased. Industrial sector had responded well to face competition in the global economy. Foreign investors were keen to invest in India, but growth was not perceived as sufficiently inclusive. Many groups, especially SCs, STs, minorities, were left out, and that data was very much severe. Poverty, malnutrition, mortality, and current daily employment status was very much less. So we had poor data or poor quality of these indicators. There were two problems from 2012 onwards, and that is why you will see from 2014 onwards, the government will also change. And there will be new discourse in terms of the development. There will be new discourse in political ideology and in political setup. Now you will see from 11th 5-year plan, 12th 5-year plan, the entire planning system of Indian economy will change. Why did this happen? We will be answering that in the next video, but yes, we should understand the context of this first. In the 11th, but we will take some more time to conclude 11th 5-year plan, and then we will go to 12th 5-year plan. Now remember this thing, that post this era, when we discussed in the 11th 5-year plan, when it was witnessed that there is no such exact or a direct impact of this development on all the sections of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, minorities, women. These are the vulnerable sections, and the development is not reaching them at the grassroots level. That is the main problem. So that is why from 2014 onwards there will be a discourse of inclusive development, not inclusive growth. There will be financial inclusion, inclusive development, and everyone will start talking about this, because the data which Economic Survey 2018-19 said that data is the new fuel, and that was witnessed back then in 2012, that data is the new fuel. There was high mortality, malnutrition, poverty, daily employment, and that led to a new thinking in Indian economic planning, that how should we plan our further growth. A vision for inclusive growth was set over there, and we still are having financial inclusion, Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, financial inclusion of all, I would say banking correspondents, and these topics are main topics for Indian economy. That is where UPSC is focusing on. That is where UPSC asks questions from. Now, remember one more thing, vision for inclusive growth. Economic growth, India emerged as one of the fastest growing economy, as we discussed. Social challenge was there, that this growth was not sufficient across different sectors. So what should be the strategic response by government? Government started to target poverty reduction, education and employment through Manrega. Government said that we will provide employment to people. We will provide them, for example, say 100 days of employment into, on every day they will earn, for example, 200 rupees. Now this sum of 100, 200 rupees, around 20,000 rupees, that will help them in poverty reduction, because they will have at least a good income, or I would say above poverty line income, or an income of 32 to 35 rupees per day. They will now invest this income into their education. We will provide them free education. Right to Education Act will be brought in, and there will be employment by this. So there should be a comprehensive reform of Manrega. This should be brought in and placed heavily in rural sectors. But the ambitious targets which were set for 11th 5-year plan was, first, economic goals to be achieved. The first economic goal was that we should achieve a 9% GDP growth rate, reduce unemployment by 5% among the educated youth. We should cut poverty headcount ratio by 10%. We should decrease poverty by 10%. That is what was asked, or what was set as the growth rate, or I would say the targets for future. Social development, we should reduce infant mortality, malnutrition, eliminate gender gap and literacy, improve sex ratio and forest cover. There was a target to increase forest cover also. In infrastructure, it was discussed that we should provide electricity to all villages and BPL households by 2009. All the weather roads to habitations, wherever there is a habitation, wherever 1,000 plus population is living, there should be an all-weather road connecting to that area. Telephones and broadbands should reach every village by 2012. Do you understand that these were the main targets set by government? However, from 2007 to 2008, this is the whole analysis of this 11th 5-year plan. From 2007 to 2008, we started strong. We had a 9.3% growth rate in the first year. The target was 9%. We had 9.3% growth rate in first year. But 2008 to 9, there happened to be a crisis, a global crisis, which usually we call as 2008 financial crisis. Now, this crisis shook the entire global economy, but it had minimal effects on Indian economy. But this still decelerated our growth to 6.7%. We will be discussing this global financial crisis, but later on in the next chapter. In 2009 to 11, the recovery happened. Rebound to 8.6% and then to 9.3% growth rates were achieved. However, in 2011-12, second slowdown came and there was European debt crisis. And this debt crisis is something which is about to happen this also again also by USA and all. And further, our growth decreased to 6.2%. The overall performance of 11th five-year plan was 8% of the GDP growth rate was achieved. Agriculture grew by 3.7%, industry grew by 7.92%, and services increased by 9.7%. That was the growth which was achieved by 11th five-year plan. Clear? However, we achieved some of the social progress. We achieved poverty reduction, and poverty reduction which was set to be decreased by 10%. This was achieved by decreasing poverty by 1.5 percentage points per year between 2004 to 2005 and 2009 to 2010. From 2004-05 to 2009-10, twice the rate of previous decades was achieved. Investment in savings, yes, domestic savings averaged at 33.5% of GDP. It means savings increased and investment also increased to 36% of the GDP. Slightly below the targets, but yes, strong performance was there. Fiscal challenges which were there in the 11th five-year plan, that is, we led the economy for expansion. These expansionary measures to counter global slowdown increased the fiscal indicators. There was price stability, and oil import costs do have always created a problem for the domestic economy, but yes, they were curbed. Now, we hereby conclude the 11th five-year plan. We will shift to 12th five-year plan in the next video, in the next lecture. In this video, we will be starting with 12th five-year plan. 12th five-year plan, this is very much important. And in this lecture, you must make sure that you make running notes, because there are some points which I have added out of the book. That is a value addition. Multiple slides are there which are the value addition actually to the 12th five-year plan, which you should keep a note of in your notes. That is how you will develop your understanding for the I would say 30-year or 50-year or 60-year or 100-year strategy of planning for Indian government, that how did we evolve from 1947 to 2025. Not only that, we will also analyze 12th five-year plan at the micro level. That is why you need to make those notes. So this 12th five-year plan, which began from 2012 to 2017, was themed as faster, sustainable and more inclusive growth. Inclusiveness we already discussed in the 11th five-year plan, that why was it important to understand that economic inclusiveness is more important. This aimed for 8% annual growth rate, that we should achieve an annual growth rate of 8%, but the actual growth which was achieved was only 6.9%. Why did this happen? And in 2014, we witnessed a change in government in India. Our current ruling party, that is BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, came into power in 2014. Now, remember that since 2014 to 2025, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, for these three successive terms, in these three successive terms, there has been major shifts in policies, whether that is economic, monetary, fiscal, or I would say political, or I would say any of the policy, there have been major shifts and we need to read them thoroughly. That is why we should take care of that in the upcoming lectures. However, in this lecture, what we will be doing is, we will be summarizing till 2017. So thereby, with the change in government, the plan was not fully pursued. Demonetization also happened in 2016. So with the change in government, this plan was somehow dropped, not fully pursued post 2014. Further, there was demonetization in 2016, in which we witnessed that Indian economy went through a major shift. After 2016, there happened to be the rollout of GST, Goods and Service Tax. The act came in place and it changed the fiscal policy of the nation. Now, what was the context and what were the challenges for 12th five-year plan to discuss? First, there was a global crisis in Eurozone. Euro sovereign debt crisis was there, which affected India and slowed down our growth in 2011-12. Just 5% in plan's first year was achieved. Just the growth of 5% was achieved in the first year of the plan. So thereby you should understand that how the crisis in Eurozone, because there was sovereign debt, that is the Eurozone countries, in which currently we have 21 countries. There was the recent most addition of Bulgaria, which joined Bulgaria. This joined the Eurozone in the month of December and became the 21st nation to do so. Eurozone is a group of economic, I would say, the countries out of the 27 countries of European Union. 21 countries have one common monetary and fiscal policy, and they have one common currency. That currency is euro, and that is why it is known as Eurozone. And due to severe debt to the governments of these countries, this led to a crisis. This crisis happened back then in 2011-12. Domestic constraints were also there, as we witnessed macroeconomic imbalances. There was inflation, and due to fiscal expansion post 2008 crisis, because 2008 there was a crisis known as usually subprime crisis or the global financial crisis, which was sourced or which originated from USA. This crisis had shifts, or I would say its waves were reflected all over the world, even in India, but slightly. Post this crisis, every country adopted an expansionary monetary policy, expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, in which the only thing that was to be pursued was providing economic stimulus, fiscal stimulus to the market. Fiscal stimulus to the market will help revive the economy, will help increase the demand, and then it will start production again. That was the main goal. In 2012 to 13, there were some tax uncertainties and investor confidence also changed. Due to this change, what happened was that the production and the economic activity in India slowed down a bit. Implementation issues were there because energy and transportation projects were slowed down. As we witnessed 2014, government changed, the policies changed, there was a slight delay in this. And due to this developmental delay, the discourse of development was set in 2014, and that is why a new government was elected by all the people of India in order to bring a change which was to be felt or missed by all the people. Now, twofold policy challenge. First, in 2012 to 2017, this 5-year plan was to address two things. One was that our economy was decelerating. As we discussed, that we were setting our bar of growth higher and higher. In this year also, we set a bar of 8% growth rate, but that was not achieved. Why? Because our economy was decelerating. That is why we thought of reviving this economy by increasing the investments quickly, by tackling the infrastructural implementation, and by introducing tax-related measures so that the uncertainties get resolved. That was one thing. Second, the long-term vision of the economy was also changed. In the long term, we thought that we should discuss, or the economists of the day, they focused on one thing. And even you will see that post this, the 14th and 15th Finance Commission, they will also recommend changes in the financial devolution also. We will discuss that. Now, the real growth potential must be achieved, and there should be structural changes in the structural reforms in the economy. First, we need to revive the investor sentiment so that investors invest in the market. Second, we need to remove the infrastructural impediments. Whatever is blocking the infrastructural impediments, we should remove that. You might have heard of hybrid annuity model, or you might have heard of built, operate and transfer model in terms of infrastructural developments. What are these models? We adopted them in the recent most era, that we should at least develop the infrastructure, build it, operate it and transfer it. Or the private players should be brought in through public-private partnership or through the hybrid annuity model. That people, we should, the government and the private players should collaborate and cooperate, should be in a partnership to develop the infrastructure so that it gets faster. We need to address the energy sector, and NELP framework should also be clarified. Now, remember that we have witnessed heavily in the renewable energy sector also, in the solar energy, in multiple other areas, and our, I would say, renewable energy share is now increasing day by day, and it recently surpassed the non-renewable energy share. That is it till now. What were the fiscal reforms and what was to be done with resource management? First of all, we took some bold steps. Bold steps were needed to improve the public infrastructure and public expenditure. So that is why the first of this was the implementation of GST. Goods and service tax, we will discuss this entirely. There is one complete chapter on GST. We will discuss that why is it implemented, why was it implemented, why was it rationalized recently in the month of September 2025, what GST comprises of, how it operates, everything will be discussed. Subsidies, there was a question on a rationalization of subsidies, that we should rationalize subsidies. Whatever subsidies we are providing to all the people, whether that is food, fertilizer, petroleum, any kind of subsidy, any kind of pension, that has to be rationalized now. Even I will tell you one thing simple. If a person who is working today in government sector or who was working in government sector, I guess 10 years, 20 years or 30 years back, his pension, the amount of pension which he is receiving today is the amount which is generated by today's demography. That is, you need to understand it, the money paid by taxpayers today is used to pay off the pension or give the pension to those who served the state 10 years, 20 years back. Now that is something which is creating a burden which is being carried forward to future generations. Subsidies, that is also a burden on the state. That is also a burden on the state. Not only on the state, but on the taxpayer. That is why UPSC asked a question that if something is provided free to the people of India, to you, to whom does the opportunity cost of that product shift? Understood? That was the opportunity cost question which was asked in 2018. Thereby, there came questions, I would say questions were asked about rationalization of economy. So now understand, inclusiveness and current account deficit will be the main two targets, and NPS also post 2015 to reduce the NPS. These will be some of the targets which were pursued upon since the reform era. Because since 2014 we had multiple other reforms like we had in 1991. First, we introduced GST. Second, we set a target of 3% on fiscal deficit, that we should incur only 3% of the GDP should be our fiscal deficit. Government should try to reduce this fiscal deficit as much as possible. The upper bar should be only 3%. Subsidy rationalization, only 1.5% of the GDP should be given in subsidies. Clear? Some more targets which were set, like 35% of investment target, 9% of real growth goal, the nominal growth, and 32% of state devolution, which was recommended. 32% of state devolution, this was, I believe, recommended by 14th or 13th Finance Commission, I guess 13th Finance Commission, 13, 14, 15 and 2016, 13th Finance Commission. 32% state devolution, that is the total share of revenue from taxes. Out of that total share of revenue, 32% should be given to states. Further, there were 20 core monitorable targets which were set, like first, it was for rapid, sustainable and more growth. First, 8% of real growth, 4% of agricultural growth, 10% of the manufacturing growth. These were the targets to be achieved. These were the targets or monitorable targets to be achieved. Poverty and employment, we need to reduce poverty by 10 percentage points. 50 million of new non-farm jobs to be created. Non-farm means non-agricultural or where direct cultivation of agriculture is not there. Skill certification for equivalent number means 50 million people should be certified with skills, should have certified skills. Education, we set a target that our mean years of schooling should be 7 years. 2 million additional higher education seats should be created. Elimination of gender and social gaps in education should be at least pursued upon. Now, these were some of the targets which were set. For health and infrastructure, we had that we should reduce our infant mortality rate to 25 out of 1000 live births. Our maternal mortality rate should be 1 out of 1000 births. That is the death of mother. The total fertility target was set to 2.1 at NFHS 3 level, that is National Family Health Survey 3. As per National Family Health Survey 5, NFHS 5, this is currently 2.0, which is less than 2.1. That is somehow concerning also, but we will discuss this later. Infrastructural priorities, investment was to be increased to 9% of the GDP. Irrigated area or irrigated land in India was to be increased to 103 million hectares. Electricity to all the villages, all weather roads to all the villages, rural tele-density of 70% complete freight corridors. This all was to be set up. Understood? One more slide for such, I would say, targets. In the sectoral growth pattern and resource allocation, agriculture witnessed a 4% growth, mining 5.7% growth, manufacturing 7% growth, construction 9.1%, and services. Now remember, why am I giving you all of these numbers and why do we need to understand the sectoral resource distribution and sectoral growth? Because when you read economic survey, when you read budget, when you read the annual 5-year plan, these annual reports of ministries, you must understand where to focus on. Because if this was set in the policy documents itself, it means similar data numbers, similar data parameters will be there in the upcoming documents also, even in the economic survey also. So thereby, once you read the documents, you should look for these numbers that agriculture, mining, manufacturing, construction, services, these are the major sectors of Indian economy where we should focus on. Understood? Moving ahead. The environment and service delivery, a target was to increase the green forest cover by 1 million hectares annually. Renewable energy, 30,000 megawatts of capacity of renewable energy should be installed. Emission reduction, 20 to 25% of the emissions should be reduced. 20 to 25% of the emission reduction should happen. 90% of the households should have at least banking access by 2017. Direct cash transfer, major subsidies via Aadhaar platform with linked bank accounts to be achieved. So this was the main vision of 12th 5-year plan by bringing inclusiveness and sustainable growth. Understood? Now, what all did we achieve by this planning till now from 1951 to 2017? What all did we achieve? We will just go through it. In 1947, our economy had a GDP of 2.7 lakh crores. That was only in 1947. At the independence level. But post that, in 1991 reforms, we witnessed a growth of GDP of about $266 billion. Currently in 2025, we have a GDP of $4 trillion. India currently is third largest economy in Asia, fourth largest economy globally in terms of market exchange rate, third largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity. This was asked by UPSC. And substantial forex reserves have increased from, in 1991 we had only $1 billion of forex reserves, but currently we have around $6 to $7 billion. 600 service sector has grown globally, and India currently is acknowledged by globe as office of the world. India is also known as office of the world. Currently our per capita income stands at 2.2 lakh rupees per person. Now that is on the nominal level. That does not mean that actually everyone is earning that much. We should keep that in mind. Social indicators of planning, that how much have we improved by doing this planning and implementing these plans. If you see, at the time of independence, we had only 20 universities, but currently we have 1100 plus universities. At the time of independence, we had 591 colleges, and currently we have 50,000 plus colleges. Health and development, infant mortality rate, child mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, literacy rates, disease eradication, industrial infrastructure, and food grain which is produced in India. India currently is self-sufficient in terms of food grains. This all was achieved by these planning years. However, these plans felt or had shortfalls also. That is, there were lacunas in these plans. What were those lacunas? First of all, we still have poverty. Despite progress, poverty remains widespread concern in India. There is high unemployment, because lately in the COVID era also we witnessed a huge unemployment gap, numbers increasing due to the unemployment. Education quality, as we know that 41% of graduates in India do not have market ready skills. Research and weakness is very weak and is not competitive globally. Gender disparities still exist. Exports are very less. Farm productivity still remains low, asked by UPSC in comparison to China, that how much farm productivity is there in India as compared to China. You must keep this in mind and try to search for this. Regional imbalances are still there. We still have the northern belt, and in this northern belt among Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, we have such belts where the poverty or I would say per capita income is very low, even below the poverty level. In 1991, due to these economic reforms of 1991, we have achieved in 1991 there was a need for reforms, as we discussed already, that we had a closed economy, economic crisis was there, the forex crisis was there, also we had some missed opportunities in the growth trajectory of India. That is why we introduced these reforms. With the 1991 reforms, we achieved higher economic growth, macroeconomic stability, increased efficiency, global integration and social development to address poverty, inequality, improve access to essential services. This all was achieved, and these are the points which you will use in your mains answer writing, because usually students do have faced a lot of issues when they are asked to summarize and write coherent answers. So these are very concise points to be written in your answers. Liberalization, privatization and globalization. These were the three measures introduced in 1991. Now, in these three measures, what we did? In the liberalization, we first dismantled the license Raj. Even lately, I was discussing in one of the classes of foundation that today, even after these many years of reforms and I would say liberalization of these many years from 1990s till 2025, there are around 35 years of liberalization now. Still, we have around 20 to 25 such permissions to be asked from in order to just start one small MSME. We were discussing an article in one of the classes of Indian economy itself. In that article also it was mentioned that in India today also MSMEs, in order to start a simple one MSME, a micro level unit or a small level unit of production, you must at least have 20 to 25 permissions, or I would say certifications, then only you can start. So understand or imagine the plethora of licenses which was required back then in 1970 and 1947 and 1990s. So we first dismantled the license Raj, which decreased the bureaucratic hurdles and removed the red tapeism from Indian industry. It allowed greater private participation in the industrial sector. We removed the trade restrictions and opened the foreign trade for India. Further, the privatization helped Indian economy to revive and introduce more investment. We reduced the public sector role, as it was said by Prime Minister also, that government has no business to do business. We encouraged private investment. The disinvestment in public sector or the public sector undertakings was decreased, which means that multiple public sector undertakings which we had, PSUs which we had, whether that was ONGC, BAIL, GAIL, SAIL, shares of these were started, or Coal India, we started to sell off the shares of these with disinvestment, allowed private infrastructural participation through HAM, through BOT, through multiple other models or PPP. Public-private partnership was introduced even in infrastructural projects. Globalization with global trade and global investment, FDI and FII was integrated, and now majority of the sectors of Indian economy attract around 74 to 100% of FDI. Even in some sectors, we still have more than 49% of FDI. Post 1991, we also introduced some fiscal and monetary reforms. In the fiscal reforms, we had fiscal discipline by reducing the fiscal deficit to 3% only, according to FRBMA. Reform taxation system by introducing GST, broaden the tax base and introduce FRBM Act for fiscal sustainability. Monetary policy was also changed. RBI was given autonomy to regulate entire banking sector. We established Monetary Policy Committee. We have not discussed it yet, but yes, it will be discussed in RBI chapter itself, for transparent interest rate decisions and adopt inflation targeting. We have a target of 4% plus minus 2% of inflation targeting. Monetary Policy Committee, the members of these Monetary Policy Committee will decide and form entire monetary policy to target inflation, have growth, price stability and growth. Both are the main targets of this Monetary Policy Committee. Banking sector was also deregulated. Interest rates and reduced the government's role in banking sector. Even the government stopped to force RBI to print more money to finance its own deficits. External sector was also encouraged to invest in Indian economy. These reforms broadly can be divided into two areas. First was the first generation reforms, then happened to be the second generation reforms. The first generation reforms were non-legislative. What do we mean by non-legislative reforms? Like to decrease government intervention, to deregulate rupee from government control, to initiate disinvestment, to encourage private sector participation. But the second generation reforms brought in legislative changes, like we brought in labor reforms, 4 labor codes, GST was implemented, FDI was liberalized, wider social impact was created. This careful implementation of reforms led to the development in India and growth, and whatever have we achieved till now, whether that is having $4 trillion of GDP or having billions of dollars in forex or having per capita income of 2.2 lakh rupees, everything has been achieved only because of these reforms and implementation of the policies and plans at ground level. Human-centric approach with the development of human capital, social capital and inclusive growth. Inclusive growth, we had one question in mains. Human capital and social capital. We had a question on human capital in mains, a question on social capital in prelims. I'm talking about PYQ. Social safety nets were also introduced. What was the impact of these reforms? We achieved macroeconomic stability, 6 to 7% of GDP growth in entire all annual years. If you talk about annual rate of these years, it was 6 to 7% on an average. There still are challenges. Jobless growth. This was also asked by UPSC in mains. Government has not as employment intensive as desired, which leads to less job creation in India. Further, agriculture sector is still in distress. There is low productivity, income volatility. Farmers were targeted that we need to increase and double the farmer income by 2022, which still seems to be a farther goal. Rising inequality is there, and this was also reported by the World Inequality Equality Lab report and the Gini coefficient. India has challenges in manufacturing sector, and it is largely discussed and asked by economists that if we focus on our macroeconomics, this manufacturing sector, a majority of the problems of employment and jobless growth will be solved. Now, how? First, India's manufacturing sector in the past had critical challenges, like it was heavily restricted and controlled by government. There were policy constraints like license Raj, MRTP limiting. FDI was not liberalized until late 1990s. Infrastructural bottlenecks were there. Infrastructural development was not there. Poor roads, we already discussed that. Human capital limitation was also there because we didn't have the capital or human capital with enough skills, education, and those people who could have regulated or I would say have had that skill set to operate the industry. That was the one thing which India had missing. Land and labor issues were there. Even the land reforms, there was a difficulty to acquire land, difficulty to have land because we had a long past of colonialism. We had a long history of having the subjugation of colonial powers who themselves were traders only. That is why there was total apprehension in the Indian population towards this, I would say, capitalism. Competition from China was also there, and China in the initial years had the policy of dumping their exports into India. Post this, we introduced multiple reforms as we discussed: industrial corridors, plug and play parks. As you might be seeing industrial parks, those are known as plug and play parks. This production linked incentive scheme, this was also lately introduced. Now you should understand that all of these reforms helped us to revive the manufacturing sector. We will be dealing with all of this in the upcoming lectures, and we will also discuss the Amartya Sen versus Jagdish Bhagwati debate, in which our Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, he talks about market-led growth, that Indian economy should be focused, as the Adam Smith and the Kuznets or Simon Kuznets or the proponents of macroeconomics, as we discussed in the first lecture itself, they believed in market-led growth, or we believe in open market, or we believe in that there should be no role of government in the market. However, Amartya Sen talks about that no, it is not about only market, rather what we should focus on is the capacity development, capability development of the population. We should invest in health, education, investment, skills of the people, and that will lead to the further development. However, all of these debates are there, but what we need to focus on is our syllabus and the book which we are going through. So thereby, in the next lecture, we will start with Niti Aayog. Till then, I wish you all the best. Thank you for being here. Thank you for for watching these lectures continuously. I have seen that people are getting engaged, or showing more engagement, not getting engaged, but showing more engagement into the lectures. People are watching these lectures, and I am receiving feedback on WhatsApp and in my personal DMs also. Thank you to all of you. I wish you all the best. Jai Hind.